You know, there's a specific kind of silence that money can't fix. It's heavy, it's suffocating, and it hangs in the air of a $10 million penthouse just as thick as it does in a studio apartment, maybe even thicker because there's so much empty space for it to echo round in. Evelyn Thorne knew that silence better than she knew her own reflection. At 42, she was the CEO of Thorne Logistics, a woman who could negotiate shipping lanes in the South China Sea without blinking, a woman who could stare down a union strike with a single raised eyebrow, yet she stood completely paralyzed in her own living room, watching her 11-year-old daughter, Maya, drift further and further away from her. Maya wasn't just quiet, she was gone, locked inside a fortress of silence that had been built brick by brick since the car accident took her father, Evelyn's husband, 5 years ago. The trauma had stolen Maya's voice, turning a bubbling, laughing little girl into a ghost who communicated only through stiff nods and the occasional scribbled note on a legal pad. Evelyn had tried everything: the best child psychologists in Chicago, art therapy, equine therapy, trips to Disney that ended in tears, but nothing worked, and the guilt was eating Evelyn alive, gnawing at her insides while she put on her armor of Armani suits and crushed it in the boardroom, pretending she wasn't failing at the only job that actually mattered. It was a gray, biting Saturday in November when the facade finally cracked. Evelyn had promised Maya a girl's day, a desperate attempt to bridge the gap, dragging her to this trendy, overpriced cafe in Wicker Park called the Roasted Bean, the kind of place where the baristas judge your shoe choice and the coffee costs more than a gallon of gas. Evelyn was checking emails on her phone, firing off directives to her VP, Sterling Vance, a man who was constantly circling her job like a shark smelling blood in the water, while Maya sat opposite her, shrinking into her oversized hoodie, picking at a croissant like it was poison. The air between them was so tense you could snap it. Evelyn put the phone down, forcing a bright, corporate smile, the kind she used for shareholders. "So, sweetie," she said, her voice sounding too loud, too desperate. "I was thinking maybe after this we could go to that American Girl store or the planetarium." Maya didn't even look up. She just kept tearing tiny pieces off the croissant, her eyes fixed on the table. And Evelyn felt that familiar surge of panic, that terrifying realization that she was a stranger to her own child. And then the bell above the door chimed, and he walked in. Julian Rivera wasn't the kind of guy you usually saw in Wicker Park on a Saturday morning. He looked like he'd actually done a day's work in his life, wearing a Carhartt jacket that was worn at the elbows, boots that had seen mud, and carrying a distinct energy of calm amidst the caffeine-fueled chaos. He had a boy with him, maybe 10 years old, with messy dark curls and hearing aids visible behind his ears. Evelyn watched, mostly because she was desperate for a distraction from her own failure. As they got in line, the boy was signing frantically to his dad, big, expressive movements. His face lit up with excitement, and Julian was signing back just as fast, his hands moving with a fluid, rugged grace that was mesmerizing to watch. They were laughing, a silent, intimate conversation that was louder than anyone else in the room. They got their drinks, and, as fate would have it, the only empty table was right next to Evelyn and Maya. Maya had stopped picking at her food. She was staring at the boy. Leo, his dad called him, and signed, completely transfixed. The boy caught her looking, and instead of being shy, he flashed a grin that was missing a canine tooth and waved. Maya froze, her eyes darting to Evelyn, then back to the boy. And that's when Julian noticed. He didn't do what most people did. When they saw Maya, he didn't give that pitying smile. He didn't ask what's wrong with her. He didn't ignore her. He just turned his chair slightly, caught Maya's eye, and signed hello. Simple, a flat hand to the forehead, moving outward. Maya blinked. She knew a little ASL from a brief stint with a tutor years ago, but she refused to use it, refused to engage. But this man, he wasn't demanding anything from her. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes warm, crinkling at the corners, brown eyes that looked like they'd seen some hard winters but remembered the spring. "She likes your son's dinosaur," Julian said to Evelyn, his voice rough and low, gesturing to the plastic T-Rex on the table. "Oh," Evelyn stammered, caught off guard. She doesn't speak much at all, really." "That's okay," Julian smiled, and then he turned back to Maya. His hands moved again. Slower this time. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Maya hesitated. Her little hands, which usually stayed tucked in her sleeves, slowly crept out. She gave a tiny, shaky nod. Julian nudged his son, Leo. "Show her the T-Rex." For the next 20 minutes, Evelyn sat there in stunned silence, watching a miracle unfold in a coffee shop. Julian and Leo didn't need Maya to speak. They spoke to her in a language of gestures, expressions, and patience. Leo taught her the sign for dinosaur, an arm imitating a chomping mouth, and for the first time in 5 years, Evelyn heard a sound that made her heart stop, a giggle. A rusty, quiet, beautiful giggle coming from Maya's throat. Evelyn felt tears prickling her eyes, threatening to ruin her perfect mascara. She felt stripped bare, ashamed that a stranger in work boots could reach her daughter in 5 minutes, when she hadn't been able to in 5 years. "I'm Julian," he said, turning to Evelyn while the kids were engaged in a silent battle between a sugar packet and the T-Rex. "I run a landscape design company, mostly residential. This is Leo." "Evelyn," she managed to say, "and Maya, I don't know how to thank you. She doesn't do this." "It's not magic, Evelyn," Julian said gently, not unkindly. "It's just meeting them where they are. You know, we have a group that meets at the conservatory on Sundays, silent Sundays. Kids, parents, some deaf, some nonverbal, just hanging out, no pressure to talk, just being. You should come." Before Evelyn could answer, her phone buzzed on the table. It was Sterling Vance. The text read, "Board meeting moved to Sunday morning. Crisis with the Asia distribution. Be there or I assume you're resigning." Evelyn looked at the phone. She looked at Maya, whose eyes were bright, alive, watching Leo's hands. She looked at Julian, who saw the text notification light up her face, and pulled back slightly, the warmth in his eyes cooling just a fraction. "I run a company," Evelyn said, feeling the need to explain, to defend the handcuff she wore. "Thorn Logistics. Sundays are complicated." Julian nodded, a knowing look on his face. "Logistics, moving things from point A to point B. It's important work, but moving a kid from lonely to loved, that's the only logistics that really matter in the end, isn't it?" He stood up, signaling Leo that it was time to go. He grabbed a napkin, scribbled an address on it, and slid it across the table. 10 a.m. Lincoln Park Conservatory. If you decide the boxes can wait. He walked out, leaving Evelyn sitting there with a cold coffee, a happy daughter, and a choice that felt like it was tearing her in two. The rest of the day was a blur. Maya was different, lighter, somehow. She kept practicing the sign for dinosaur in the car. But Evelyn's mind was a war zone. Sterling Vance was a viper. If she missed that Sunday meeting, he would pounce. He'd spin it to the board that she was distracted, emotional, unfit. She'd worked 20 years to build this empire. Could she risk it for a play date? Saturday night, Evelyn sat in her home office, the glow of spreadsheets illuminating her face. While Maya slept down the hall, she looked at the napkin Julian had left. The handwriting was jagged, confident. From lonely to loved. She thought about the silence in the penthouse. She thought about the laughter in the coffee shop. Sunday morning dawned crisp and bright. At 9:45 a.m., Evelyn stood in her walk-in closet. On the left, her charcoal power suit armor. On the right, a soft cashmere sweater and jeans. She grabbed the jeans. When she walked into the kitchen, Maya looked up from her cereal, confused. She signed, "Work." Evelyn shook her head. She signed back, clumsy but determined, a sign she'd looked up on YouTube the night before. "Park." Maya's spoon clattered into the bowl. The smile that broke across her face was worth every single stock option Evelyn possessed. They arrived at the conservatory right at 10. It was a lush, humid jungle inside, smelling of ferns and damp earth, a stark contrast to the steel and glass of Evelyn's world. There were about 15 people there, a mix of adults and kids. And there was Julian, kneeling in the dirt by a fern bed, showing a group of kids the underside of a leaf. When he saw Evelyn walk in, holding Maya's hand, he didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just smiled, wiped his dirty hands on his jeans, and walked over. "You made it." He said. "The boxes can wait," Evelyn replied, feeling lighter than she had in a decade. For the next month, this became their secret world. Evelyn blocked off Sundays. She told her assistant, "Do not disturb me unless the building is literally on fire." She started learning ASL, struggling with the finger spelling, feeling clumsy and foolish. But Julian was there every step of the way. He was patient, his hands guiding hers, his touch electric and grounding all at once. They grew close, not just as parents, but as people. Evelyn learned that Julian was a widower too. His wife had died during childbirth with Leo. He understood the grief, the anger, the feeling of being left behind to captain a ship you didn't know how to sail. "You built walls to keep the pain out," Julian told her one evening, sitting on a bench while Maya and Leo chased fireflies. "But walls don't filter, Evelyn. They keep the love out too." It was perfect, until it wasn't. Because you can't be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and disappear for weekends without the sharks noticing. Sterling Vance had been tracking her. He hired a private investigator, sleazy, but effective. He got photos. Photos of Evelyn sitting in the dirt in jeans. Photos of her struggling to sign. Photos of her looking weak, looking distracted, looking like a mother instead of a machine. It all blew up on a Tuesday. Evelyn walked into the boardroom for the quarterly review, feeling confident, feeling human for the first time in years. But the atmosphere was frigid. The board members, 12 men in gray suits, wouldn't look her in the eye. At the head of the table, Sterling Vance stood up. He didn't greet her. He just clicked a remote, and the projector screen lit up. There they were, the photos. Evelyn looking vulnerable, learning ASL, Evelyn laughing with a landscaper. "Gentlemen," Sterling said, his voice dripping with Fox concern, "we have a crisis of leadership. While our competitors are innovating, our CEO is gardening. Well, we face supply chain issues in Europe. Evelyn is playing mime in the park. She has lost her focus. She has lost her edge. She is prioritizing a personal hobby over the livelihood of this company." He turned to Evelyn, a smirk playing on his lips. "We need a leader who speaks the language of business, Evelyn, not whatever this is. The board is moving for a vote of no confidence, effective immediately." Evelyn stood there, feeling the blood drain from her face. She looked at the photos. She saw herself looking at Julian with adoration. She saw herself looking at Maya with love. Sterling thought these photos were evidence of her weakness. But as Evelyn looked at them, she realized something. She didn't look weak. She looked alive. She took a deep breath. The old Evelyn would have shouted, threatened, pulled out legal bylaws. But the new Evelyn, the one who had learned that communication is more than just words, did something else. She walked to the front of the room. She didn't look at Sterling. She looked at the board members. "You think I'm distracted," she said, her voice steady. "You think because I am learning to speak to my disabled child, I have forgotten how to run this company. Sterling shows you these photos and sees a waste of time. I look at them and I see the biggest missed opportunity in the history of Thorn Logistics." She paused. She raised her hands, and she began to sign as she spoke, her movements sharp, deliberate, powerful. "There are 460 million deaf and hard of hearing people in the world," she said, translating her own words in real time. "That is a market cap of $3 trillion. And do you know who serves them in the logistics sector? No one." She started pacing, the adrenaline flooding her system. "I haven't been gardening, Sterling. I've been researching. I've been seeing the world through a different lens. Why don't our delivery terminals have visual interfaces for deaf drivers? Why don't our tracking apps have haptic feedback for the visually impaired? Why are we building a company for the 1990s when we should be building one for a world that is demanding inclusivity?" She pulled a flash drive from her pocket, one she had prepared with Julian's help just the night before, a what-if project they had dreamed up over wine. She plugged it in, overriding Sterling's SLIDESHOW. Up popped blueprints. Project Bridge, a fully accessible logistics network, hiring deaf dispatchers, visual-based warehousing. "Sterling wants to fire me because I'm a mother," Evelyn said, staring him down. "I'm telling you that being a mother has made me a visionary. You want to vote me out? Go ahead. but you'll be voting out the only person in this room who sees the future." The room was silent, deadly silent. Then the oldest board member, Mr. Sato, a man who rarely spoke, cleared his throat. He looked at Sterling, then at Evelyn, my granddaughter. Sato said softly, "Was born deaf last year. We have struggled to find her place." He looked at the blueprints on the screen. This is not a hobby, Sterling. This is innovation." Sterling's face turned purple. "This is sentimental garbage. We are a shipping company, not a charity." "We are a company that solves problems," Evelyn shot back. "And I just found a problem worth solving. Now, are we going to vote, or are we going to work?" Sato slammed his hand on the table. "I move to dismiss the motion of no confidence, and I move to allocate budget for Project Bridge." Immediately, seconded. Another board member said. Sterling Vance looked around the room, realizing the tide had turned. He grabbed his papers, shoving them into his briefcase. "You're making a mistake. She's emotional. She'll run this place into the ground." "Maybe," Evelyn said, leaning in close so only he could hear. "But at least I won't die alone in a corner office, Sterling." He stormed out. Evelyn slumped against the table, her knees shaking. She had won, but as she looked around the sleek boardroom, she realized that winning here wasn't the victory she cared about anymore. She grabbed her phone. She texted Julian. "I won, but I need to see you. Meet me at the spot." She left the office at 2 p.m., something she had never done in her career. She drove to the conservatory. Julian was there, sitting on their bench, waiting. He stood up when he saw her, his face filled with worry. "Did they fire you?" he asked. "No," Evelyn smiled, tears finally spilling over. "They listened. I spoke their language, but I used your words." Julian pulled her into a hug, and it felt like coming home. "I'm proud of you, Evie. I have a question," she said, pulling back. "Project Bridge, it's going to be a massive undertaking. I need a consultant, someone who understands design, who understands the community, who understands people." Julian laughed. "You want to hire a landscaper to consult for a logistics firm?" "I want to hire a partner," she said, looking him dead in the eye, in every sense of the word. "The wind off Lake Michigan usually cuts right through you in December, but that evening, standing on the balcony of my penthouse with Julian, I didn't feel the cold at all. It had been 6 months since the boardroom showdown, 6 months since I'd stopped trying to be the ironclad CEO and started being, well, just Evelyn. The city lights of Chicago were twinkling below us like a reflection of the stars we couldn't see. And inside, through the glass doors, I could see Maya and Leo building a fortress out of sofa cushions. "You know," Julian said, leaning his elbows on the railing, holding a mug of cocoa, "if you'd told me a year ago I'd be consulting on warehouse ergonomics for a shipping giant, I would have told you to lay off the fertilizer fumes." I laughed, resting my head on his shoulder. The smell of hemp pine, sawdust, and that specific, clean scent of winter air was my favorite thing in the world now. And if you'd told me I'd be spending my Saturdays learning how to prune hydrangeas instead of reviewing quarterly projections, I would have had you arrested for insanity. Project Bridge was soaring. It wasn't just a PR stunt. It was real. We'd retrofitted 3 distribution centers with visual haptic alert systems. We'd hired over 100 deaf and hard of hearing employees. Mr. Sato, the board member whose granddaughter was deaf, had become my biggest ally, crying openly during the ribbon-cutting ceremony when he saw the new sign language interpretation screens at the dispatch desks. But the road hadn't been smooth. Sterling Vance hadn't just disappeared. He'd gone quiet, which was worse. He was lurking in the background, retaining his shares, whispering poison to the more conservative investors, waiting for a slip-up, and the slip-up, he hoped, would be my personal life. "We need to talk about the gala," I said, the knot in my stomach tightening. The annual Thorn Logistics Winter Gala was next week. It was the social event of the season, where the city's elite came to pat themselves on the back. Usually, I went, alone, armored in couture. "This year, I'm going," Julian said, cutting off my anxiety. "And Leo is coming, and Maya. We're doing this as a family, Evelyn. No more hiding in the park. They'll eat you alive." "Julian," I whispered. "Sterling will be there." The press will be there. They'll look at your hands. I grabbed his rough, calloused hand. And they'll judge you. They'll say the CEO is dating the help. They're cruel. Julian turned to me, his expression shifting from playful to that fierce, protective intensity that I loved. He dropped my hand and started signing as he spoke, emphasizing the weight of his words. Let them look. Let them judge. I build foundations that hold up houses, Evelyn. I work with dirt and stone and roots, real things. If those people think money makes them better than me, that's their blindness, not mine. I am not ashamed of who I am, and I know you aren't either. He was right. God, he was always right. The night of the gala arrived. I wore emerald green, a color of life, not armor. Julian wore a tuxedo that fit him surprisingly well, though he kept tugging at the collar, joking that he felt like a penguin in a straitjacket. Maya and Leo were dressed up, looking nervous but excited, clutching each other's hands. When we walked into the ballroom at the Palmer House Hilton, the silence rippled outward from the door like a wave. Heads turned, whispers started behind champagne flutes. I held my head high, my hand resting on Julian's arm. We navigated the room. I introduced Julian not as a landscaper, but as the lead consultant for Project Bridge. He charmed them. He didn't pretend to be one of them. He was authentically himself. When a snooty banker asked him about asset allocation, Julian talked about soil composition and root integrity as a metaphor for stability. And the banker looked like he'd just been enlightened by a monk. But then Sterling Vance approached. He looked slick, oily, holding a scotch that cost more than Julian's truck. He blocked our path near the ice sculpture. Evelyn, he smirked, and the gardener, how quaint. Did you spruce up the hydrangeas out front before you came in? Old sport. The insults were lazy, but they were loud. People stopped talking. Maya shrank against my leg. I felt the rage boil up, the old CEO instinct to verbally flay him alive. But Julian squeezed my arm gently. He stepped forward. He didn't look angry. He looked pitying. Mr. Vance, Julian said, his voice calm and carrying easily across the hushed room. It's interesting. You look at a garden and you only see the dirt. You don't see the growth. You don't see the blooming. You just see the mess on your shoes. He took a step closer, towering over Sterling, not with aggression, but with presence. I might work with dirt, sir, but I create things that live, things that breathe, things that last. You trade in numbers that disappear when the market crashes. So you can call me a gardener. I take that as a compliment, because while you're busy counting your leaves, I'm the one watering the roots. He then looked down at Maya and Leo. He began to sign, big and broad for the whole room to see. Family is strong. Fear is weak. Maya, my shy, silent Maya, let go of my leg. She stepped forward, looking up at the terrifying man in the expensive suit. She raised her hands. Her movements were shaky, but clear. You are sad. She signed it. Then she spelled it out. S.A.D. Sterling blinked, confused. What is she doing? She's pitying you, Sterling, I said, my voice ringing out. She's saying that you're sad, because you're the poorest man in this room. Laughter. Not at us, at him. It started as a ripple and grew into a wave. The elites of Chicago, the people Sterling tried so hard to impress, were laughing at his pettiness. Charmed by the honesty of a landscaper and a mute child, Sterling turned red, sputtered something about unprofessionalism, and retreated toward the bar. The rest of the night was a blur of triumph. We danced. Julian spun me around the floor, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care who was watching. I saw Maya dancing with Leo, teaching him the steps, her face glowing with a joy I thought I'd lost forever. Later that night, back at the penthouse, after the kids were asleep, Julian and I sat on the sofa, exhausted but buzzing. You were amazing, I said, taking off my heels. You destroyed him with a gardening metaphor. It was poetic. He was easy. Julian shrugged. Bullies always are. They have glass chins. He grew serious, turning to face me. But we need to talk about what comes next, Evie. Next. The contract for the consulting gig is up next month. The big rollout is done. He hesitated, looking down at his hands, those hands that had reshaped my entire world. I don't fit in your boardroom forever, Evelyn. I miss the dirt. I miss the sun. I can't be a corporate consultant for the rest of my life. My heart stopped. Are you saying you want out? No, he said quickly, grabbing my hands. No, I'm saying I want in. But on my terms, and I want to know if there's space in your world for a guy who comes home with mud on his boots every day. Not as a consultant, just as Julian. I looked at him. I thought about the emptiness of my life before him. I thought about the silence that used to suffocate me. Julian, I said softly, I don't want a consultant. I never did. I want the guy who taught me how to listen with my eyes. I want the guy who showed my daughter she has a voice. He smiled. That slow, warm smile that melted my defenses. He reached into his pocket. Good, he said, because I have a proposal, and it's not a business one. He didn't pull out a ring box. He pulled out a piece of paper. It was an origami flower, folded from a sheet of blueprints, the blueprints for Project Bridge. He unfolded it carefully. Inside, written in his jagged handwriting, were 3 words. Build with me. I couldn't afford a rock that would match your earnings. He chuckled nervously. So I thought I'd offer you a partnership instead. A life partnership. I started crying. Ugly crying. The kind that ruins your makeup and makes you look like a raccoon. You idiot. I sobbed, laughing. This is better than a rock. Is that a... Yes, that is a boardroom approved, notarized, irrevocable yes. We got married 6 months later. Not in a cathedral, and not in a hotel ballroom. We got married in the conservatory where we first met. It was a chaotic wedding. Leo lost the ring. In a fern for 20 minutes. Maya insisted on wearing high-top sneakers with her flower girl dress. Mr. Sato gave a toast in broken English that made everyone cry. But the most important moment happened during the vows. When it was my turn to speak, I handed my bouquet to Maya. I turned to Julian. I didn't speak. I signed my vows. I had practiced for weeks in front of the mirror. My hands shook a little, but I got through it. You taught me to see. I signed. You taught me that silence is not empty. It is full of answers. I promise to listen to you. I promise to grow with you. I promise to never build walls again, only bridges. Julian cried. The tough, stoic landscaper had tears running down into his beard. He signed back. I love you. Years have passed since then. Thorn Logistics is now the global leader in accessible shipping. We've changed the industry standard. Sterling Vance eventually retired, bitter and irrelevant, to Florida. Maya is 18 now. She's starting college in the fall Gallaudet University. She wants to be an architect. She wants to design spaces that speak to people without words. She still doesn't talk much vocally, but she is the loudest, most vibrant person in any room she enters. And me, I'm still the CEO. But I'm different. I leave work at 5 p.m. I spend my weekends in the garden with Julian, getting dirt under my fingernails. I learned that you can build an empire of steel and glass, but it will be cold and hollow unless you fill it with people who know how to break the windows and let the air in. I look back at that woman in the cafe, the terrified, lonely CEO trying to buy her daughter's love with a croissant, and I want to hug her. I want to tell her that the breakdown is the beginning. I want to tell her that the scariest thing isn't failing. It's succeeding at the wrong things. We live in a loud world. Everyone is screaming to be heard, posting, tweeting, shouting over each other. We think connection comes from volume. But I'm here to tell you that the most profound connection I ever found happened in total silence. It happened when I stopped trying to control the narrative and started watching the story unfold in the hands of a man who loved me enough to teach me a new language. So, here's my question to you. Who in your life are you talking at instead of listening to? What walls have you built that you think are protecting you, but are actually just keeping you lonely? Maybe it's time to stop talking. Maybe it's time to look up, look into someone's eyes, and really, truly listen. You might be surprised at what you hear when you finally embrace the silence. Because love doesn't need a microphone. It just needs you to show up. Thanks for listening or watching.